Hi, friends, and welcome to the Making Spaces podcast, a podcast about making space for yourself, both and others, both literally and figuratively. I am one of the co-hosts, Sarah Heath, and this is
the other co-host, Josie Jimenez.
And today we are joined by, and I checked how to say his last name, so I feel good about myself, Peter Lublick, who is the executive director of an organization called Bethanykids that is making space for kids and for our folks to be able to provide for those kids. We're going to hear a lot more about that organization. We accidentally called it Bethanykids, and that's a whole nother as the Canadian
whole other game.
Fish. So I just discovered something about you, which is I thought you were a Canadian, but you're just living in Canada.
No, so I am Canadian, but I just moved here last year. So the last 8 years of my life, I've been living in the Middle East. As one does. So just a couple of kilometers north of us was Iraq, and then west of us was Saudi. So like pretty chill place to live. It was
Cool.
good.
Love it.
Yeah.
This is going to be a great conversation. So before we get into it, we have to ask you the question we ask everyone at the beginning of our conversations, which is, where is one of your favorite spaces and why? And as I've been Instagram friends with you for a while, I'll let you know that you've been in a lot of places. So good luck choosing one of your favorites and why.
Yes, I have been. I think one of my favorite places is a little coffee shop in the country of Kuwait, where I used to live. And it was like, sometimes they sold antiques, sometimes they just served coffee. It had the best cake ever. It had like Persian rugs everywhere. Actually, if I move my head, there's that plate on my mantle, that like bronze platter is where they serve the tea on. And I bought it off them because I was like, I love this place and I need something to take with me. So super cool. Like one of those places where it's just as likely to have like some weird crappy souvenir or like a 200-year-old Persian rug. You just don't know what's going to be there. So I loved it. I used to hang out there with friends all the time. And so that was my favorite place. Now I guess my basement with that plate is it's the pandemic. Nobody goes anywhere anyway. So I sit in my basement a lot. So I guess that's my favorite now.
Yeah, I was explaining to Josie what a basement was earlier as a joke because we don't have basements, which I grew up in Northern Ontario, about an hour and a half north of Toronto, tiny town. And like literally the basement is where as a child you spent most of your time. Like my grandparents actually said like, whenever my cousins and I would like tromp in the house, the first thing was like go to the basement.
Yeah. Like don't break anything in the adult space. Go to the basement.
Go to the basement.
Nothing matters there.
That's so funny.
Yeah. It's like half storage closet, half where the children belong. So it really does tell you something about the value that we place on kids, I guess. It's like, go to the basement.
Kids. Who needs them?
There could be mice, there could be mold, but there will certainly be toys and kids.
Yeah. So basements also have become like, it's also like a marker of where you are in your like family. If you want to think about like your traditional family, it'll start off as sort of like a mud room, a playroom where like nobody cares. And then as the kids get older and you get older, it slowly turns into a hockey watching zone where like man cave, like is what Americans call it, or like a shack or whatever. They like, my aunt and uncle, who are two of my favorite humans who live in just outside of Toronto, they have the most decked out basement. They have stadium seating for movies, a popcorn maker. She has a craft room, and he has a like he likes to pack his own bullets, which is odd, I know. And it's so different. Like Canadians and guns is so different. Like he literally only has guns that he can use for hunting. And then she has a little area where she like dries the meat and such. But like, it's like he's also an incredible carpenter. So it's beautiful. It is like this beautiful space. And I think I haven't been in a basement. And like, if you were to say, hey, you're going to go stay in my basement, it's like, oh, you're a serial killer. But in Canada, look how beautiful. Those of you who are listening, go check out YouTube, because Peter's basement is worth this entire conversation. It's beautiful.
Right. Yeah. Without context, this conversation thus far is tricky to follow. But hey, we're talking about space and you kind of have to see it. So get the program, get on YouTube, I guess.
I just want you guys to know that I made a podcast about space and how people need to be in proximity with each other the same month as a pandemic happened. So a visual conversation space about being together, which is
Right.
literally illegal. So,
Yeah. Do you remember
guys,
that? Like we used to see people in real life. Like,
yeah.
Nope. Don't remember it.
wow.
Don't miss it. Just kidding.
Josie, if she could, would like set up a system where only the people she liked would rotate through her living room.
Right. Like one at a time at a slow, right.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I say I don't like people, but I have a lot of friends. And,
People
you
like
know.
you is the problem.
But you just keep them at arm's length, I guess. See, the thing is,
Yeah.
the first time, so I was supposed to move to Canada in June, right? And I was in Florida in February. Lockdowns already started in the Middle East. So we actually arrived in Canada the last day of February, like just a backpack. We weren't intending to come to the cold climate. We were just like one backpack. And then because of the pandemic, for the next 4 months, I lived out of that backpack, like at other people's homes. So I feel like, I know this sounds terrible, but I feel like I missed the first lockdown because I was staying with other people. I was like, it's not the same. Everyone's like, oh, I'm watching so much on Netflix. I'm like, I don't get that opportunity. So now we're back in lockdown, and I gotta say, it's good. I like it. I know that's terrible to say because like that is hurtful for a lot of people who are losing business, but honestly, like right now, just sitting in my house is okay. It's good now that I'm not living out of a backpack.
I agree.
Yeah.
I like being at home.
If it didn't
It's a
have
good thing.
if it didn't have the like sadness of like, hey, millions of people
Right.
are losing their
Yes.
lives, being displaced, losing their businesses, and you hate saying it. You hate saying it in public, but it's true. We've talked many times about how this season has really taught me that I'm an introvert, not an extrovert. Always thought I
Right.
was. How I am much more someone who just likes. I love travel though. That is the piece that
Yeah.
has been really
It's
hard
missing.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I have done a little bit of traveling over the years, and I'm definitely missing that. And I'm looking forward to the season when that is possible and safe to do again at some point, whenever that is.
well,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about why you were in the Middle East, what your project is, how it's making space for kids that in a unique way, and a unique way too, partnering with church communities and communities to provide. So talk a little bit about that, and then we'll ask you questions.
Right. So in terms of the Middle East, I was there teaching. I taught at a school for the first 7 years. And then I also worked in an art studio for the last year, working on like climate change projects with kids. So it's a lot of fun, cool things happening. I also was working in like communications for NGOs. So I started to meet a lot of really cool organizations. And I came across Bethanykids a couple years ago and was like, this is the coolest organization. At the time, their logo was horrendous. Like if you Google it and you're interested in aesthetics, it'll make you cry. It was bad. And I felt like it was one of those organizations.
Laughing only because as people who work a lot of times in progressive spaces, we just don't spend time on design. So we're not laughing at you.
Right.
We're feeling
Just
your
so
pain.
relatable.
Feeling it. Right. Yeah. Listen, it was like it was bad, but it was like a brilliant story, like incredible, like things happening. But the way it was communicated was a bit messy. Anyways, I started working with them, and I'm so pumped. It started with the last 20 years they've been providing surgeries for kids. So that's the big push is we pay for surgeries across 7 different countries. We make sure kids who can't afford care can access healthcare. We also train surgeons so that there are more surgeons to do those surgeries, specifically surgeons who are trained in pediatrics. So they're trained to work with kids. So we'll train the pediatric surgeon. We'll give them like a top-up salary. So no matter when they return to their home country, they're getting a fair wage, and they're not just like having to live in poverty just because they want to help people. So we take care of them. Any kid who can't afford care, we take care of them. And then a lot of children, like even after the surgery, you know what I mean? Like there's still some hoops to go through. So whether that be rehab or wheelchairs, whatever it is to try to get that kid back into a space where they're able to access schooling, able to play with their friends, whatever it is that we need to do to help them get there. That's what we're working on.
So you create the communication between, you are now doing their communications and you're executive directing, and you're making sure that the story is being told. Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's right. Because a lot of the program stuff just happens beautifully, like from the ground up. So they don't need some white guy in North America to be like, hey, here's how you should do surgery. like not a surgeon. So I have no idea. That's a bad idea for me to tell them how to do it. And it's the same with rehab and how to like make culturally appropriate like programs. That is best left to the people on the ground. What I'm trying to do in my role as executive director is really relay what's happening there in terms of story to the West, and then where possible, kind of get donors and supporters and people who want to partner up and get them to connect with our teams across Africa. So I become, for now at least, this kind of middle person trying to redirect money. I'm happy to take anyone's money and redirect it to Africa. That's my gig, I guess.
I make space for your wallet to have money.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
First of all, what a great organization providing medical care for children.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, what does it look like? So you train doctors from all over the world or in that nation? What does that look like, the training process?
So right now we recruit surgeons from all across Africa because we're accredited to do pediatric surgery in Africa right now. So we have surgeons that come across from any country they happen to be from. We train them in Kenya. Depending on how long they need the training, like 3 to 5 years-ish, depending on their previous experience. And then they're now an accredited pediatric surgeon, and they can, if they choose, they can return to their home country. If they do make that choice to say, hey, I'm going home, I want to take care of my people, that's when we'll say, listen, what do you need from us? Like, how can we continue to support you beyond the training? So that's when we give like top up to their salary. And then any child who can't afford care at their hospitals will take care of that as well. So that now it's more local, right? It's not just a Western surgeon in someone else's country, but it's a local surgeon in their home country serving their own people, which we think is kind of the better way to roll.
You're speaking my language here. Sustainable, charitable work. Wow.
Yes, right.
Love it.
Yeah. It's making space for someone to care for their own community. And oftentimes, I worked with an organization in Uganda, and they had such a fantastic way of thinking through this. Like, it really becomes colonialism when we just show up and say, I know what you need.
Right.
And we're so good at that, guys. We love, I call it poverty tourism. We love a selfie with, a village full of people.
Right.
But there is something to be said, more than something to be said. It's absolutely imperative that the folks who are getting trained to do this work, so the organization I went with, their whole thing was just creating community leaders from within. And exactly what you're talking about is so important, because they would get kids and they would send them to these colleges and they would help them get through. And then they would incentivize staying within their own community. Because otherwise what happens is this, they call it the brain drain, where people just leave and there's no hope within the community. So if you have entrepreneurs who can't create jobs within their own spaces and places, they can't take that gift that you've given. And if you like are a nerd like me and you follow like the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell, you know that like one of the most transformative things that's happened in the community is when people get knowledge and bring it back. So it's such a great model to do that, and to not abandon, not to give someone a really expensive education and then say, but you're going to, as you said, live in poverty. So you're making a choice between your people and this. So it really does make a sustainable space.
I hope so. And I think the word you said is critical. It's that incentivizing, because it's great for us to say, hey, now you're a surgeon. And they're like, well, you know what I could make if I moved to Canada as a surgeon? A lot more. So like, I'm not like, and that's tempting. And all of us feel that. We want to have livelihoods. We want to pay for our stuff. We want to be able to eat and feed families. So if we can incentivize so that it's affordable and appropriate levels of income for these surgeons to serve their home community. So what we do is how we figure it out is whatever the average pediatric surgeon in that country gets, we figure like their starting salary should be at least 30% above that. And then beyond that for any year of service. So whatever they get at a local hospital and whatever 30-40% is above that, we will make sure that that difference gets covered. So if your local hospital is paying you this and we're like, yo, we want you to live sustainably. So we will top up the difference. So for all of our surgeons, we start by giving a top up salary based on whatever you get locally, and then make sure you're getting a competitive, solid wage, so that You don't have to live in poverty to serve your community, because many people around the world, particularly in the West, like, organizations, head office folks will live in relative affluence, but then expect frontline workers to live in poverty. And what we want to make sure is are the people who make it happen, the surgeons, are being paid and treated well. And then any kid who gets there, if they can't afford care, again, we pay for that. Yeah.
I love that. It's a difference between doing mission work at people and with people.
Right. Yeah.
It really makes us feel quite good to go in and decide and define and really say, okay, well, this is, whereas a local person knows their community so much better, and it makes total sense for them to make their own space and to define their own boundaries. And it's just such an exciting thing to hear. And that's why we're excited to have you on, because there is this sense of like, how can we make space for other people that isn't our space? So oftentimes, so many of my friends have talked about, so it was Korean American Day the other day, and three of my actually really good friends who I am in a little chat group with, they're Korean. They are all people who were adopted from Korea and have a very difficult, they were joking around about Korean American Day, but this like, oh, thank you. They were joking with us. Thanks, white saviors, for coming and getting us. Actually, one of them is not adopted. Two of them are adopted. One of them is American. And it was such an interesting thing for me to think about this idea, that this pushback that's happening a lot, because kids do need medical care. I have friends who have adopted kids that were in difficult situations and couldn't afford the medical care. And so the only choice is for them to leave their culture and community and then come to somewhere that they do not fit. My friend is having the pain of, she said, my son sits in a class where he's the only Eastern African kid, and even in our family. And he had his first teacher that looked like him. And he said to his mom, "I'm beautiful like Miss whatever is beautiful." And she was like, yes. She was so like crying.
Yeah.
Yes. And he's actually severely autistic. And so for her, that moment of like his connection to that, I think so often we think we've got this culture that you should want to be this, which is not.
It's dangerous, right? It's narcissistic, it's colonial, racism is in there, like all sorts of factors. And our assumption is best case scenario is if I can take you from your family and raise you myself. That's our basic assumption. I could do a better job than you can of raising your own child. And our whole kind of adoption model, aid model is based around that assumption, rather than saying, hey, listen, I'm pretty sure these parents love their kids the same way any parent loves their kids. That is, some of them are amazing. Some parents are less helpful with their kids. Like there's just variety. It's not homogenous. So why not try to resource the people, like the families, right? Try to help them, try to eliminate the obstacles that they face. That's just a better system than like handpicking, this is a cute kid I'm going to keep for myself.
Right? Right? He's preaching.
I mean, that's toxic. That's messed up. It's really like, and I think one of my worries now, like whether it be the church or in North America, there's this sense of like, some people are realizing this global aid movement is pretty messed up. So the solution is to give up on being part of the global community, right? And so we feel like we're stuck between either being part of really messed up systems that are colonial, that are racist, or the whatever, or thinking, oh, I'm going to take the high ground and I just won't help anybody. So now I'm not making any mistakes. And these are the options that we feel like we're presented with. And I think there's a need for us to champion causes like Bethanykids and like other causes that try to help locally and say, you don't abandon the rest of the world, but you also don't ride in on a white horse. Like there is somewhere in between.
Goosebumps.
Right?
I literally have goosebumps as you're talking, because that's absolutely my heart. Yes.
Yeah, we've got to be involved. Like we're part of a global community, all of us. We've got to love our neighbors regardless of what continent they live on. But that doesn't mean that we get to be the saviors who do very toxic and dangerous things, right?
Yeah, and this mentality is something that we should think about locally, right? Like in the United States, like this idea that Oh, I'm in the context of Los Angeles because I'm very passionate about Los Angeles. Like, oh, Echo Park is the ghetto. So I, as a white person, I'm going to go in, fix it up, make it expensive so everybody else has to leave and all the white people can move in.
Right.
Like, that's a lesser but still very impactful form of colonialism. Like, you moved
same
in.
model, right?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, Christians especially, are very quick to go to an orphanage in Africa, hold a cute little baby, take a cute little picture, but give zero shits about systemic racial inequality in America.
Right. Yeah. It's like I flew all the way across the world to Africa to realize that a black kid was cute, but I'm definitely going to cross the street if I see a black kid coming towards me. And you're like, you want to like process that a little bit and see the double standards, right? The hypocrisy. There's something tragic about that. And I think it's the sort of not in my backyard culture where it's like cute and keep it over there. If you're in my neighborhood, you're going to have to look like me, dress like me, behave like me in every way. And that just, it's power, right? Like at the end of the day, it's our power, it's narcissism, it's thinking that we always have the right way. Our culture and systems are the best things. And we've got to shake ourselves of that because that is holding us all back.
I actually had the strangest thought as you were talking about this. I couldn't name why the movie Black Panther hit me in a way. I watched it twice in the theater. And then I was at Disneyland. Remember Disneyland, guys? Which was not like I'm not like a huge Disney person, but I enjoy going with friends and
love Disneyland.
Absolutely. I think we can give them a pass.
Yeah. So I was in the line and this little boy, black kid with his parents, he was wearing a Black Panther shirt and he was tiny and his sister was adorable. And his dad was like, clearly you could tell we had been in the line for a while that he had to go potty, typical doing the potty dance.
Right.
Dad was like, all right, bud, like we're gonna go to the bathroom, looks at his wife, gonna go to the bathroom. Little boy goes, Wakanda forever, and goes to the bathroom. And I thought, why is it that made me want to weep? Right. And I realized it was because in that movie, there was no sense of white hero. There was the truth. A little bit of the truth was told. Even obviously it's like a story, but the idea that this is like the birthplace of civilization. So why wouldn't it be like the most technologically advanced?
Right. Yeah.
And for someone to have people that look like them, right? Representation is so important. For this little guy to go, that's my superhero. Now, obviously, people are going to say, well, then do we have to have every kind of, you can like be excited about female superheroes if you're a boy and whatever. You don't have, but when you've been so underrepresented, like I'm imagining the effects that seeing a surgeon that looks like you, speaks the same language as you. When you yourself are so, you haven't seen it before. I experienced that as a female leader. Someone will say, I've never thought I could lead before.
Right.
And then they look
which is a wild thing to consider. It's like, wait, so you never thought you had any influence over your peers and could teach them important lessons. Never occurred to us because of our systems and culture.
Yep.
I mean, because you've nailed it, right? Like it is so toxic that a kid would think, oh, the person helping me has to be white because that's what the white folks do. And Black people are the ones receiving the aid. And I think your comment on Black Panther is so brilliant because many of the Black heroes that we've had on television or on movies are often people who overcame tragedy, overcame whatever. And there's still this kind of like underdog story. Right. And then you get Black Panthers like, so I'm the king of the most powerful nation on earth.
I'm the richest.
And, right? Like that's a different narrative altogether where it's not like this underdog kind of story. It's like, no, this is the boss. This is a new story too. Cause I think when I see a lot of like how we're responding to culture right now, there's like, we could rebrand a white hero as a Black person, and that's really going to be brilliant. And that's the way that we've approached it. We're like, hey, is there any like famous story we could redo with Black characters? That'd be grand. And you're like, actually one of the things about Black Panther that's profound, like it didn't replace White Panther. It wasn't like, oh, we had a white one, let's see how the black dude does. It's
Pink
like,
Panther
no,
is not black.
yeah, there's Pink Panther. Like this is the story. This is the beginning of the story. And there's no other, it's not like, oh, there was a white guy who did it. Now we're going to have, no, this is just a iconic character who's the king, right? Who leads a powerful nation that, as you said, is technologically advanced. It's beautiful because it's hopeful, right?
Right.
And it creates a new kind of sense of hope for people. And I think that's very true at very measurable levels, whether it be the surgeon, whether it be the teacher, whoever it is, whether you're talking about LA, where, you know, if we're investing in, I don't know, like paying teachers fair salaries who work in these communities, who are from these communities at a very basic level, like that, we're creating heroes, right? And we all look up to people. As the church, we've done a pretty bad job of that because, like, you know, you've got my wife and I were talking today, like church planters that, you know, in the 90s, you had to have like the goatee and then we lost the goatee, maybe a big bushy beard, but it's a dude, right? It's a white guy who like drinks a lot of coffee and is like super
now
hip
he
and
might
cool.
be a little like into whiskey, and that's like, I'm claiming my freedom in Christ, and I do a lot of crunches. I do a lot of crunches.
Yeah, but there's like, right, there's a picture of it. And instinctively, you're like, oh, we're recruiting this church planter guy. And it's like, oh, there it is, guy. Like it's going to, we've created the archetype in our head. Right. And so when a woman who's a powerful leader shows up, it's like, well, there's just something different about, like, it doesn't quite fit what we're expecting, right? And yeah, it's the systemic thing that I think we need to be championing. And I love the phrasing here around making space. And actually kind of shoving aside and be like, yeah, we got to make space for some people at this party if it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, making space is stepping aside. Is stepping aside and saying, oh, and I am reminded of the white woman hero thing, even how much even misogyny and racial identity has played into it's in all of us. If we're honest, if we are there, it's in us in a way that if we can admit it instead of saying, I've reached a point, I think a progressive church sometimes can say, I'm good, I got it. I have I've got my black friend, they're great. I've got, you know, I've collected my lesbian friend.
I've got all my tokens, right? I've collected them all. Bingo, I got it, right?
But I think the reality is that we can always be asking ourselves, have I gotten out of the way? Have I asked the question of, can someone from within this own community do it themselves? And that's what I loved about, I had gone on a mission trip to Uganda before with a large megachurch from here in this area. And they're wonderful people with great hearts, great hearts, but it was in some aspects poverty tourism. And I felt very sick to my stomach after studying with Willie Jennings, who's a professor. Dr. Jennings is this phenomenal professor of Black church studies. And there was something I could tell, you know, how you can just tell, you're like, something feels wrong. It feels like really wrong. And there were things like, we watched the Jesus film, guys, with all the white Jesuses.
With all the white Jesuses. Yeah.
It's so weird.
There's somewhere about getting to the, like, as progressive lefty kind of people, it's easy for us to judge the conservative folks, but I like what you're saying, that they come with it with a big heart. And I think we've got to acknowledge that and say, like, we need that heart. And honestly, we need that generosity, because if you look at who's writing checks for mission organizations, it continues to be like our conservative friends. So like, they are stepping up to the plate when it comes to donating and showing love in that way. But there's a missing piece there, right? Like, they're maybe choosing the wrong organizations. Maybe there's systemic racism that they didn't notice. Right. So, you know, when we're coming before, we had that like dichotomy between like some of us on a more progressive sense are like, well, then just don't do it at all. And you're like, well, actually, that's not the right choice. Or just make fun of the people who do it wrong. Also not helpful, right?
Ooh, yeah, that's a really excellent space making. Is not about just pointing out who's doing it wrong.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because that's easy, real easy. Of being like, well, I'm glad that like I can identify everyone else's faults and I'll just be perfect by not giving anywhere. And then like, that's the safe goal. That's the safe one. Right. we can do better. I guess at the end of the day, like we can do better and we can learn from each other better and be less narcissistic, all of us, thinking that we've got it figured out entirely and like we know everything, because it keeps coming back to that. Whether we're identify as progressive or our conservative friends, like everyone seems to think they know what's right, and that is where it starts as the problem, thinking you've got it figured out. That's where racism, sexism, all that stuff begins, thinking me and the people who look and sound like me are the right ones and everyone else is a shadowy reflection of that.
Yeah, I feel so fortunate because I mean I went to a small Christian university, APU. Shout out to APU. And
shout out to the alumni out there.
There's a lot.
Yes.
It's a scary, scary cult. We can talk about it offline, Peter. I'm concerned how many people I meet that went to school.
It's pretty intense.
Okay. All right.
But the one, AP does a lot wrong. But I was really fortunate. I actually worked in the Center for Student Action in college, which is like the missions organization. And the conversation that we're having about we can judge all we want, but that's not going to fix anything.
Right.
Is a good conversation, I think. And it's one that I now realize I've had since college. In this organization, if you signed up to go on they called it an action team because mission trip was a weird connotation.
Right.
If you signed up to go on an action team, you were required to go through this like series of educational like events and retreats and stuff that taught you why we're not going to go fix the world. You're going to, and we only partnered with certain organizations. Yeah. We partnered with organizations that weren't doing this whole colonialism model. And the students were only going there because they either needed extra hands or in the case of one team went to Namibia, and it was a team full of software engineer students to help build their medical software infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because they just needed extra bodies.
They needed a specific skill and they had it. So done. That's partnership.
Right. And so I feel like I'm fortunate, and that's probably one of the best ways I think to go about it, because it's not like they really shoved it down your throat like these people are bad, or other organizations were never really mentioned. It's just this is the way that we found is best.
Yeah.
And teaching them and enabling them to go on these trips and supporting them all the way through. You came back, you did a debrief, and somebody from the school would actually visit each of the sites to make sure that shit was not, going awry.
Not a mess.
Every year. Yeah. So it was like this cool model of we're going to try to do it right, and we're going to fix it if we're not doing it right.
Yeah.
Which is, I feel like, what we should all be doing.
Absolutely.
Critical thinking,
right? Like the assumption that we can do it better. We're not saying we can do it perfectly, but we can do it better. And if every time we're getting better, I love that. Because even at a university level, teaching that to students, that like, you don't need to go and build a school and take the job away from a local tradesperson.
Exactly.
And that's become almost the trope as non-Christians look at the church, like, oh, missions trips. And it's become a joke rather than like, here are these, like the heart of these kids, I hope, and the heart of the organization behind it is to go around the world and make it a better place. That's the assumption.
Right.
But because of how we've done it, it comes across as a joke of poverty tourism, of like, okay, who's going to take turns holding this cute baby, and then we'll put her on Instagram. Like, it gets toxic. I like what you're saying, that they were trying to do it better, and I think there are people out there trying to do it better. And coming back to our Black Panther reference, like we need models of things that are better than what we've got right now. It won't necessarily be perfect, but we like enough with critiquing things. Like, that's cool. We could do it. It's super easy. And like, let's find and make better things, right? I mean, you can sit around and say we're talking about space. This room decor is terrible. Okay, well, at some point, change the furniture, right? Like make it better. Get them on stair or something. I don't know.
I think there's this really, I understood for the first time sort of what I struggled with when I moved from Canada to the US. Josie, for a minute, just hold on. This is Peter and I talking about our people.
Wow.
I grew up in a culture that defines itself by not being another culture. Right?
Yeah.
Well, from literally when we travel, we have a Canadian, because we look American.
Right.
And Americans like to think that Canadians are American, but we're
American
not.
light.
Right.
Right. In fact, we are proudly not.
Right. It's our whole thing. It's
It's
literally
our thing
defined.
is we are not Americans. We know how to travel. We are not like destroying the world.
Yeah.
We don't run around with guns. We have all these like opinions about Americans.
Right.
We had this thing. When I moved, the sass that I got from people that I like love and adore, they're like, why would you move there? As if you were moving it like with your like teenage relative. Like, do you know what Americans are like?
Yeah. Don't move into the meth lab. Bad choice.
Move into the meth lab.
Amen.
But I remember thinking, what feels so weird? And what felt so weird is our culture can't be defined by not being another culture. We have to know who we are. At some point, you stop defining yourself. And this is the same critique I have with my own denomination and why I've pushed and worked to say, who are we then? Great. I get we're not the mega church. Awesome.
Right. Good for you.
Who are we? And I think as one of the things that's been fun and part of the Canadian organization here in the LA and area, which is so fun because even like during the pandemic, they have Canadians that like different people like Ryan Gosling came and spoke and like doing these online things because they're all these Canadians that live in LA or have a house in LA or however it might be. But it's been fascinating because I think people are starting to try to feel it. What does it look like to have pride in who you are, not in opposition of others? Because there's such a cultural thing of defining ourselves against. And I love this idea of if we're going to talk about like, it's okay to like critique crappy mission work and to say, and to admit that we've all done it, but to admit that it's a step in the right direction. Because to just exactly what you're saying, say, okay, well now I'm just going to like laugh at these people who are doing it. At least they're doing something. Versus getting, well, I don't want to get anything wrong. And I think there is some, cancel culture is a thing. And there's some like legitimacy to that. But then also, then how are we going to be the opposite of that? Which is a creation culture. If there's cancel culture, there has to be a creation culture. One that says, okay, then let's make something better instead of just sitting back. And that's often my critique too of deconstructed Christians is they just sit and throw rocks at the thing that they hated and that did traumatize them. But I feel like that's a stage.
It's not where you stay.
No.
And it's not a place, it's a place where maybe we've all come through and it's a place of maybe mourning and grieving, but it's not a place of like pridefully pointing, being like, haha, now I'm out of it. It's like, no, you're still in it, right? You're still in process, right? And until you start making the new thing, again, we said that earlier about donors. Sometimes we're like, oh, I'm against missions because it's this. It's like, or is it just because you're lazy and cheap? Like maybe just do some reflection.
Ooh, burn.
Right? Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, good for you. You can critique, we can all critique churches and organizations. So make it better, right? Like genuinely. And I mean that about everything. That could be about music, about art. The amount of people who in any field are like, oh, pop music today is terrible. Oh yeah, I haven't heard your latest album. Well, I haven't made one because oh, odd. Well, that's interesting, right? Like,
moral of the story, everybody. Open up your wallets and donate to Bethany. What are you doing?
Do something, right? Like do something, and rather than critiquing everyone, because I think, as you said a moment ago, like at least those folks are trying, and I think we can like. Even I see it at a political sense, America did just have a bit of an election, which as a Canadian, I probably shouldn't wade too much into.
Oh, please.
But I mean, it's tempting. But you certainly see like even candidates who I'm like, oh, I kind of like that person. It's like, I wish you'd stop talking about your opposition and start talking about what makes me hopeful for what you have.
That is my friend's biggest critique. And I think it's a really good one. This isn't someone who I would have considered apolitical for so long. He's like, I don't care that you're not Donald Trump. I don't care. Like I do
like
care.
Most people aren't. Like the vast majority of the planet are not him.
Except for like the people that he birthed. Most people are not. And so I just want to know what you're actually about. And I'm so sick of hearing that you're this. And I was like, well, we need to like, and then I thought, you're right. One of the reasons why I like Pete Buttigieg is I feel like I actually know what he thinks about things.
Right. Yeah. He's casting some kind of vision that you're like, do I like your vision? Is it, you've painted a picture of the world for me. Do I want to live in it? Yep. I want politicians to do that, whether they be Republican or Democrats. I want you to create for me visually or metaphorically, what kind of world are you creating and how are we going to get there? And some people do that really well. AOC's, in other words, she's like, so here's a big like 50-year plan. You're like, whoa, like big dreams, like hope for the future. That's interesting. Haven't seen that in a while. Like,
and I think that's the same with a church. That's the same. That's why Making Space is about casting a vision for it. And then knowing whether it's your vision or your vision does to step aside and let someone else decorate the space. It's just admitting that this is not a thing in opposition of. And sometimes there is the need for opposition. I'm not saying we don't critique, and I'm not saying we don't call people to accountability and things like that.
Absolutely.
But I don't think our only stance and our only creative divine spark comes from throwing rocks at other people.
We have to stand for more than what we're against. Absolutely. And that is true in all senses of it. You've got to be standing for something.
Next t-shirt, we have to stand for more than what we're against.
Let me write that down.
Yeah, make that.
Just so you know, we literally make t-shirts.
Make a lot of t-shirts all the time. I love it.
We have lots of them.
I've kind of been absorbed into the wear a lot of the same colors culture. So when it comes to shirts, it's like, what gray shirt should I wear today? So I lack any creative spark when it comes to my shirts.
I only wear white shirts. Don't worry about it.
She literally only wears white.
Right. Somehow I'm like, I'll express my creativity some other way. I think for me, part of it started with the traveling, where when you're traveling and you're like, so I can have 2 shirts and they're going to fit in the backpack and I'm going to be on the road for 2 or 3 months. So I better be comfortable wearing their shirt every day. And I need people to not realize it's the same shirt, right? Like, how can I? So I'll keep it basic. I'll keep it plain.
I love it. This has been such a fantastic conversation that I could go on forever. I've had goosebumps so many times in this conversation. Thank you so much. And we will have links to be able, and we'll talk in just a minute how to get in touch with you. But the final question that we ask everyone is, if someone is wanting to make space for themselves or others in a tangible way starting today, what is that one thing you would say is a way to make space today?
I think the heart of it is like just listening to others, just listening. Like we're doing today, like people need to do more of. Listening to people who are different than you, because that it's in those moments you realize you don't own the table, you don't own the space, and there's an awareness that grows. So we do need to pause and actually just pay attention. I think that's the biggest thing we can do, whether it be global missions or local community. We've got to start paying attention to other people and where they're at.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
How can people get in touch with you or your organization or whatever you would like to share in this moment?
Absolutely. So we have a website, because it's not 1980. So we do have a website. So Bethanykids.org. You can check it out. We're on Instagram. So Bethanykids.ig. We couldn't get Bethanykids. Someone else had it. So Bethanykids.ig is our Instagram. You can connect with us there. We've started recruiting ambassadors from all across North America, people who represent this cause and are helping to champion it. So if people are like, hey, I want to participate, I want to get involved, but I don't know how, there are ways to get involved like that ambassador program. So check us out online. If you fill out a contact form, it comes straight to me. We're not a huge organization. So if you want to talk to me, just fill out a contact form, find me on Instagram. I'm happy to chat.
Oh, thank you so much. And now how can people get in touch with us, Josie?
You can find us on Instagram at Making Spaces Podcast. You can find us on our website, makingspacesPodcast.com, where there are links to our YouTube, Patreon, merch, etc. And you should check out our Patreon and merch because they're pretty dope. You can find me at Josie Takes the World, and you can find Sarah at Rev Sarah Heath.
Well, thank you for joining us, friends. We will see you next week where we will be
saving a space for you. Bye.
Bye.